Indeed, the events are grave, they are weighty, they are deep, and they are delicate. Preliminary observations are not impressive, and we're talking of what we saw and heard a few hours ago. This has to stop being about a contest of egos. This is not even about this or that political formation, because as things stand, all leaders on either side of the aisle in this country are currently falling short of the glory. This is not the time for defensive attitudes and dismissive talk. This is not the time for "I know it all." This is the time for leaders to climb down from their increasingly short pedestals. This is the time to listen. We are in a crisis. The NewsGang is here.
It is now clear that there was no protest. It was chaos, anarchy. Parliament was being targeted, and State House was being targeted. Those who planned this chaos had a very premeditated plan. They shared that plan, including online. And the plan was to take the symbols of authority and democracy, our symbols of democracy in the Republic, which is Parliament and State House, to make sure that they show that they have achieved some sort of a regime change. So this is nothing to do with protests. This is nothing to do with freedom of expression. It was an unconstitutional attempt to change the regime of this republic. And this is therefore, yesterday what the police did to foil was they were able to foil an attempted coup.
The hashtag is NewsGang at Citizen TV Kenya. Welcome to the program, ladies and gentlemen. Let's begin there. We have quite an eventful day yesterday, but quite an eventful press conference that we heard from the Cabinet Secretary in charge of Interior in the country. So everything that happened yesterday was boiled down to an attempted coup and an attempt at regime change or unconstitutional regime change. Sam?
Right. The Interior Cabinet Secretary taking the moment, of course, it was nearly, of course, more than 24 hours since those events began yesterday in the morning. And to give his diagnosis and the understanding, of course, the country was in anticipation to wait on what does the government have to say, especially following those quite chaotic scenes that we witnessed in different parts of the country, to an extent that lives were lost, businesses were broken into, torched, wares stolen. Of course, now you're hearing even traders talking about the amount of work they have to do to ensure that they're able to recover from those situations. So obviously the country was looking at, so what does the government think? And for him to come out and say that this was an attempted coup, that's a very serious statement coming from the Cabinet Secretary, who also sits in the National Security Council. And seeing the senior police officers standing behind him, led by the Inspector General, Douglas Kanja, it looks like this was shortly coming from a meeting, a serious meeting. I would imagine that the National Security Council has already held their meeting and arrived at some conclusions and what action needs to be taken. So obviously, that's the communication from the Cabinet Secretary. That's the position. You also hear from the Deputy President saying that this is an attempted coup and the government is not going to allow any such kind of events that we witnessed yesterday. Again, we had him saying that we will do everything it takes, but don't ask me what. I don't know what to understand from that statement. But at the same time, you're at that situation listening to the CS talking about the sort of action that they are going to take, the compensation that they are going to take. I think one thing that stood out for me is the fact that the Cabinet Secretary is acknowledging that property was destroyed, property was lost. There are businesses that are hurting, that it will take them time to recover. And going ahead to say that in efforts to help them, there will be an attempt to, because Parliament has not made an appropriation of resources to compensate, then they are going to come together, including personal donations to go towards the businesses. I was only surprised that I don't hear him say anything about what happens about justice for those that died yesterday. And towards the end, the press conference was about nearly 40 minutes because it began at about 3 or 2 p.m.
Yeah.
It went all the way to about 3:40 with very limited remarks by the Inspector General. So towards the end is where that you hear the Cabinet Secretary talking about a family, even if you lose a relative who was a thief, it is still painful.
Yeah.
And the Inspector General condoling with the families that lost. I would imagine that
that would be
the
first thing. Yeah, that would be where you start.
Because even the security agencies, the internal security agencies, in this case the police, they exist to protect life and property.
Yeah.
So property is important for sure. Yeah. Because you look at those images, it's quite devastating to see that people whose livelihood is exactly that now they have nowhere to report to. When they go there, they're just looking at the ashes. But at the same time, what is the sanctity of life that you have accorded as a country? For a government to, until now, not necessarily acknowledge, apart from the statement that I saw from the Prime Cabinet Secretary and Cabinet Secretary for Foreign Affairs. Which
started off at least with that.
Exactly. So in paragraph 2, you find him acknowledging that lives have been lost and mourns the loss of lives and injuries that have affected both the police and the civilians. There are some questions there because the government is ready to compensate property, a good thing. How about the people we continue to lose? Because I would imagine that the genesis of all this, now that you're being told it was a coup attempt, the genesis, even the build-up to yesterday, was a question of justice and recognition that life is more important than anything else. That is lacking from the statement from the government.
Yeah, before you come in, Jamila, everything that this was billed as an anniversary, right? To mark what happened last year, June 25th, 2024. Everything that took place over the last year. We saw families out on the streets, but today the Cabinet Secretary all billed it down to not a peaceful protest, but something else. Let's listen.
What was billed as a peaceful protest was in truth a calculated disguise, a coordinated descent into chaos marked as civic expression, masked as civic expression. Beneath the banner of democratic rights, we witnessed a well-orchestrated campaign of political violence. What happened was not spontaneous. It was not random. It was deliberate. It was coordinated. It was funded, and it was premeditated and politically instigated.
Okay, but I think a few points to note. No, it was not random. Not like last year. This one was coordinated. This one was planned because everybody knew it was an anniversary. And so when he talks about it being a calculated disguise, by whom? Rex's mother? Obienge's father? Their siblings? Are they the ones who came up with these disguise? Okay, so our young men were shot and killed last year. People who are still missing, their families were part of this very elaborate exercise, disguised as civic expression, but all coordinated, funded, premeditated, and politically instigated towards a coup.
15 people have died, Yvonne. Since yesterday.
Does this also include Albert Ojwang's family? So they were all part of this conspiracy. That's the question that came out for me when he said this.
And you know, it's a bit sad for me when I was listening to the tone of that press conference. It reminds me of the president's tone last year on 25th of June in the evening after the breach of parliament and everything that happened, and the president came out and he spoke really harshly, and that tone was criticized quite a bit, and that same tone is what I heard from the minister today when he speaks like this. And it made me think about the images that we saw in our news bulletins today. Yesterday, I was doing the news and we read a statement from the Kenya National Commission for Human Rights. At the time, that said 8 people had died, and all those 8 people had died from gunshot wounds. And then when you know today is day 2 and it's the aftermath of it and the numbers have gone up to 15, and you learn that among those who were killed was a high school student who was going home on a motorbike on midterm break. And you hear about another family that talks about how there's that 17-year-old son, Dennis Juguna, with the motorbike he was going home in was involved in an accident during the protest in Molo before police opened fire and killed him. Or the family of this Winfred Mwangi, whose husband, Kelvin Jao, who worked in road construction, had just left work when he was on his way home and he was shot in the head while standing at the Kikuyu bus stop. Or Fatuma Opang, who's the mother of, who has a nephew, a 17-year-old nephew, who was shot dead in Kajiado. She doesn't understand what happened. Or in Karatina, when you hear someone who was in a gym who was shot, a single bullet pierced through a window and struck Kenneth Ouma in the neck as he exercised and he died. So when you do not talk about that, it comes as an afterthought in your press statement. In fact, he spoke after he was asked a question about something else, and he was like, oh, as a by the way, that any death. But what do you tell all these people? What do you tell all those who have been carrying the wounds for the past 1 year? We talked about how Rex Masai's mother, how much she has even changed physically compared to when we saw her the first time a year ago, and now you can see the toll that the grief has taken on her. And her husband was on JKL last evening, and you could see how difficult it was for him to even speak. He had to keep composing himself before he says anything. And it is very important for people to feel that their pain is being listened to, that somebody actually acknowledges that something did happen. It's well and good when the Minister for Interior says no one is going to come out and support the police, and I will. But then now, what about these families who seem to be an afterthought or seem to have been forgotten? And when they are mourning the loss of their loved ones, including a 17-year-old child who was on a motorbike going home for midterm. Very painful.
Yeah, and you know, I think the law exists for everybody, right? Goons, looters, protesters, thieves, policemen. And I think with what we're hearing from that today, it's this stern warning, this stern talking down to, like you said, the word treasonous criminals was used last year, and now it is, you know, an attempted coup, and all of this was planned. And I'm even seeing a couple of comments here, people saying, I mean, if it was an attempted coup, surely would the government not have had prior intelligence to be able to foil this? But anyway, that's what they perhaps say they were able to foil. But then again, Linus, praise for the police. They did well. They foiled an attempted coup. He said, I will stand by you. I have your back. I have your back. Well done.
Maybe we listen to that soundbite.
Yeah.
He's praising the police.
Our security agencies exercised remarkable restraint amid extreme provocation. I want to say this to the brave officers injured while protecting Kenyans' property, key installations, including Parliament, Judiciary, and State House, against the rioters and no doubt hired thugs. We feel your pain and sacrifice that embody the truest expression of patriotism. And since there is no one who is going to defend our police officers, I want to speak authoritatively here. I thank you, our police officer, for a job well done against the extreme provocation. I will defend the police officers, all the police officers who did a very good job yesterday. You have my full support, 100%.
As it should be the case, Yvonne, this is the head of the Ministry of Interior. And for every civil servant working there, including the police service officers that were deployed yesterday, they ought to know that they can actually count on the leadership and the backing of the CS in charge, which is why we saw CS Murkomen there giving very strong support to the police officers. But of course, Kenyans of all walks of life who are observing these events will definitely be looking at what transpired yesterday. How did the police conduct themselves? They're going to look at whether the police were as restrained as CS Murkomen was saying, or whether the police committed any excesses. And of course, there is IPOA, which is also definitely going to look at how the whole exercise was conducted. And let's make a few observations about what the police went through yesterday. It was very, very tough on their side as well, because there were very specific targeting of police officers. Some fought physically, individually with mobs. There was one, we ran that footage of a police officer being chased down the road, and he falls down, he gets beaten by a mob. It was a very tough day for the police. Some were injured, and we saw them being treated in by the field medical teams. So as to the kind of day they had yesterday, it was extremely tough. But what is the backdrop? The backdrop was that of we had excessive use of force in the protest that was held last week, including the point-blank shooting of Kariuki Boniface, who is still in Kenyatta National Hospital. So the police have been basically being tested and being judged as to how they handle the public. And now, with the backdrop of the CS saying this is a military, a coup attempt, a coup d'etat attempt, he went on to now give shoot-to-kill orders. And I think we do have that soundbite. Maybe we can listen to that shoot-to-kill order.
Ile shida yenye inafanya hata polisi za ingine ipige wakora risasi ni kwa sababu wanashikwa, wanaenda, wanarudi, wanakuja kuchekelea polisi kuambia sasa tulifika wapi, hakuna penye tumeenda. Si ukweli? Na tumeambia polisi mtu yoyote mwenye atakaribia police station piga yeye risasi.
Damned if you do, damned if you don't. It's a very delicate time in the country, and especially in the security services. And is there a moment, is this then a moment to look at the entire infrastructure of how can we return normalcy, and how can the police be able to perform their duties, and how can the public trust again be built? Because what we've seen in the last 2 days, especially yesterday, in the interaction between the police and regular wananchi, this is worrying.
Yeah, indeed. And I think some of the footage we've also been showing is, attempts at when mobs try to attack the police, there are civilians who come to their rescue and who, try to calm down. There we go. And there were several instances. Is this the female police officer?
Yes.
And then there were a couple of others as well. And from what I saw online, actually, one of the guys who was involved in trying to protect her was then later to face the same cops and was almost being beaten. I think tried to protect his brother from being
someone else,
from being clobbered by the police.
And this same protesters are the ones who are taking them to the ambulance. You saw footage of them trying to help them.
Right.
Hussein Khalid was there cleaning their faces and everything, yeah.
But these are some of the interactions that you're seeing that are happening that perhaps would start to say, if we worked on things better in this country, these scenes would sort of be more of the ordinary in terms of less violence against the police, but also less violence against the civilians. But in that press conference today, the Cabinet Secretary in charge of Interior had quite a lot to say about, everybody. There's those who are attacking the police. There's those who are attempting to overthrow the government. And he also roped in diplomats and members of the clergy. And linking them to the anarchy. That was interesting. Let's listen to him.
The orchestrators of the violence went back to their safety of their homes. Some did not even reach town. They were just in their homes in the leafy suburbs of Nairobi and watched the goons and criminals terrorize innocent civilians. Is this a scenario which a section of church and foreign diplomats wanted and controlled? Is this the precursor to the recently promised Christmas party?
Now, you see, if you live in this country, you see what's happening here. So, first of all, the church has been very clear in the days leading up to, including that joint statement by, was it 12 foreign embassies? But here is what is interesting. You tie that to anarchy, but not only that, you tie them to politics. We all know this statement about a Christmas party, 2007, 2008 being a Christmas party. Is this a precursor to that recently promised party? So in this one sentence, would we be fair to assume that he is lumping members of the clergy embassies to Gachagua?
I
mean, you know, when you have that one statement in the same breath, you see, what are we saying here? And then at the same time, you've said this was well-planned, well-coordinated, well-funded, and this was an attempted coup. Then you rope in these people. So we're saying that this well-funded attempted coup is something that the clergy and foreign embassies wanted and controlled, and then you link it in one fell swoop. 1 + 1 =
11.
Right.
I think, Yvonne, let me just provide some context before I chime in. One, in the financial year ending June 30th, 2025, the National Intelligence Agency received 46 billion in budget. In March of this year, they received an additional 9.3 billion shillings in budget. I didn't expect that would be the sum total of what that agency does. Because they are sufficiently funded that if all this that Onesimus Kipchumba Murkomen was saying this afternoon is true, then probably Kenyans need to demand better from them. Because yesterday in the morning, Onesimus Kipchumba Murkomen did a lap of honor in the streets of Nairobi.
Yes.
Assuring Kenyans of their safety, as business people of their safety. And in less than 48 hours, he was back saying that this was a well-planned and orchestrated plan to overthrow the government. So at what point did they realize that the statement that was released by the foreign embassies, that the church service that happened on Sunday at the All Saints Cathedral could all amount to a link to the Christmas party calls by Rigathi Gachagua?
Right.
Clearly, either somebody is doing his job well, but the person who is supposed to execute that is not doing it right, or the whole system is broken. That they had this information and they sat onto it until this afternoon that they chose to speak on it. And that is exactly what we are saying, that there's a crisis. For such a more than 18-hour event in the capital city of Nairobi and 24, 25 other counties to happen, and you have this kind of top-level intelligence that there's a planned coup, and you do nothing about it. Clearly, there's a problem. And that is the problem you're speaking to, that we need to run this country better. We need to manage the affairs of the taxpayers of this nation better. And therefore, trying to play politics with such serious claims is not to the interest of the families that lost their loved ones on the same day last year, those who've been abducted in the course of the last 12 months, and those who lost their lives yesterday. It is a disservice, it is an injustice on the part of the Ministry of Interior.
And this would be quite the conspiracy, because remember, it's the families of those who lost their loved ones, because remember, they were part of this ruse, right?
Exactly.
With the clergy, with the foreign embassies, with Gachagua, to overthrow the country. This is quite an elaborate, scheme, which would take quite a number of people. Na kuna siri kati ya watu wawili. But then I'm reminded by somebody on Twitter, you call yourself Democracy Vigil, that last time they blamed Ford Foundation.
Oh, yeah.
Which they then walked back. Now there's a new scapegoat. How long before this is walked back and there is an apology? Sam?
Paragraph 11 of the statement by the Cabinet Secretary for Foreign Affairs, Musalia Mudavadi, to the diplomatic missions, he says, given the global geopolitical challenges and ongoing security concerns in the Horn of Africa, Kenya places paramount importance on maintaining national security and stability. Then he poses, should one condemn the government for ensuring security and stability when critical institutions such as administrative offices and police stations are being set ablaze in the purported peaceful demonstrations? He also asks a very important question, depending on how you look at it. Violence has no place in our society, and we cannot hide behind the excuse of protesting to justify unlawful acts. When individuals attack law enforcement facilities or destroy private property, is that a form of protest? What was the objective of such actions? These questions demand honest reflection to ensure our nation's progress. You know, what I find interesting, and of course, now, if the president is diplomat number one, perhaps the cabinet secretary for foreign affairs is diplomat number two, and leads that ministry. When he raises this question with the diplomatic missions, I don't know what he's expecting, what sort of answers he's expecting, because when they express themselves, they are calling for restraint and, of course, the government to allow the exercise of the Constitution, and Kenyans who are coming out to express themselves. And nobody is saying that what we witnessed yesterday is good. Yeah. Indeed, again, we have to reaffirm that violence and the killings that we saw yesterday should have no place in our country that is led by a Constitution. But when the government takes this route, and this, we've been here before, when last year, there was that official denial of the number of people that died. You recall that we struggled to even get a figure from the Minister of Interior. Immediately after that, I remember talking about 25 people had died. The government was reporting a lower number. Then we grew to about 42. The government was reporting 25. When we reached 60, we've never had of an update from the government. This time around, I see the statement, I don't know, there's the statement of the Interior Cabinet Secretary, is the statement by Kipchumba Murkomen. Sorry, either Interior or Foreign Affairs, indicating that at least 10 lives have been lost. But that failure to even acknowledge as deaths, let me just read you what the Cabinet Secretary for Interior says, that let me write from the outset, express my deepest sympathy to every Kenyan who endured suffering during yesterday's protest, and says, to the families of those who suffered harm, both members of the public and security personnel who bore the brunt of violence and those whose livelihoods were shattered, your needless pain is our collective sorrow. So what is the struggle to just say those that lost their loved ones, the government sends its commiserations or condoles with you and say that justice will be done? Okay, fine. I know that has been said before and you have not seen justice a year later, but perhaps even trying to set a new record. Kipchumba Murkomen is experiencing the first protests, major protests since he came into the office. The predecessor, the deputy president now, Professor Kithure Kindiki, had his moment when protests were done, when he saw the security forces at the parliament buildings, and of course what exactly happened. And you'd have thought that those lessons of June 2024 would have meant something. And indeed, you look at even the response that we saw on the streets of Nairobi and the path to State House. I actually didn't know the name, razor wire. That the police, there are actually 2 layers, right? That the police were able to put in place in preparation for what they were expecting, because of course you don't want another breach of parliament. So if this was a moment of reflection and the government had a moment to even plan on how to quell the demonstrations to ensure that key installations are well protected, what else does it mean? Because if we've been through this before, a whole year, Kenyans have been waiting for justice. Families, you saw the victims and what they have been going through the past few days when you've been covering their stories, including the memorial that was at the All Saints Cathedral. They have just been asking, where is justice for us? And I think, even as we continue this conversation, this should have been a learning moment for the government to better prepare to respond. When you come out and say that this was a coup, this was terrorism, I stand with the security authorities, this is just fine. But at the same time, I think the Interior Cabinet Secretary is putting himself in a very difficult situation. And listen to that clip that he's saying, if you see protesters coming to police station, shoot. On sight. Why would you do that? Because remember, the police service is independent. It's only subject to the command of the Inspector General and the officers under him. He has a role, again, like you said last week, to direct the National Police Service on matters of policy. Shoot to kill is not a policy issue. If I were him, that's not a point that I would say in public.
And he was not the only one. You know, in Parliament also, this matter was alive. And again, you know, sort of on a similar thread, this issue was about politics and it was heavily politicized. I'd like us to listen to MP Jeanette. And then we will come back. Yes, let's listen to that.
There was destruction of property in Nyeri. There was destruction of property in Nyandarua. There was destruction of property in Kikuyu. There was destruction of property in Nyamakima. That tells you who the chief goon is. The chief goon is Mr. Rigathi Gachagua, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, we must call a spade today. We must call a spade today, Mr. Speaker. You can see, Mr. Speaker, this is one man who is holding his community hostage, Mr. Speaker. He has decided to use his community and destroying their property and making and impoverish them in this country, Mr. Speaker. This is the Lord of poverty. This is the man who wants to make the community from Mount Kenya to become poor so that he can rule them, Mr. Speaker.
All right, and the assessment of, just who was to blame for what happened yesterday, it's everybody. It's, You get the blame, you get the blame, everybody gets the blame except for the leaders themselves, because members of parliament were not done. So first it's Gachagua's fault, but hey, former Chief Justice, it's your fault too.
And I must say, shame on you, Chief Justice Maraga. You're currently on pension, paid by the government. They pay for your cars, they pay for your gardener, they pay for your cook, and then you go to the streets to demonstrate and mislead our children, to destroy people's properties. Shame on you, Chief Justice Maraga. Somebody of you...
And even there was a script. If you listen to what the members of parliament were saying, you listen to what the CS Interior was saying, and then you listen to what the deputy president was saying, they were almost saying the similar things. The deputy president talked about how yesterday was one of the most violent and anarchist day in the history of our country. He talked about how there are churches and religious organizations that came out and advised the young people to exercise their freedom, but that the churches incited the young people. He talked about how there are envoys and diplomats who told the young people that they had right to exercise their right as they pleased, that no one could stop them. And he talked about them, how they're inciting young people. And then he said something really interesting about this never happening again. Maybe we listen to that.
We cannot interfere with the freedom of assembly. We cannot interfere with the freedom of movement and freedom of expression and freedom of the media. However, the government will never allow what happened in Kenya to ever happen again in our country. Whatever it takes. Na msiniuliza tutafanya nini?
But tunauliza mtafanya nini? When you say whatever it takes, words like treason, terrorism, anarchy have been thrown around today, coup, by senior leaders in this country. And we've had diplomats being brought into the mix. Church leaders are there. Politicians are there. So when you hear such words about coup and anarchy and all that and whatever it takes, it's actually pretty worrying to the Kenyan who's sitting at home and watching those statements and thinking, what is going to happen next? Are we going to see arrests? Are we going to see, all sorts of things are going through people's minds. And the tone of the conversation today and the tone of the messaging today, I was listening to Jeanette speaking in Parliament, and it sounded like he was at a political rally, anajaribu kuamsha mihemko ya watu, and he's in Parliament, and the way they speak, seriously, is really worrying to a Kenyan who's thinking, so, ni nini itafanywa? Are people going to start raiding my neighborhood looking for those who have been involved? Because why don't we use, as you talked about how there's a big budget for intelligence and all that, fanya uchunguzi, kama tumepata orodha ya watu ndo hawa tunawashika, instead of instilling this fear and this thoughts of worry and all this anxiety in people's minds and hearts. Yvonne, watu wajasaoni imefanyika jana. There are all those whose businesses have been looted, and I was looking at all those pictures. It was bad. Watu wanalia, mali yao yote imeenda, mtu anafikiria investment yake imeenda hivyo na hana uhakika kama atapata tena. People are worried, wale ambao watu hao wamefariki, wale ambao hawajui wako wapi, because I was seeing a whole thread of people asking where is so and so. So there are all these things that are going through people's minds about what the hell is going on. I've used that word on TV, but yes, what is going on?
Yeah. Okay, yeah, not to worry. It's
it happens.
Do you want to?
Yes.
Do you want to close before we take a break?
Yeah, sure. And I think and hope that our leaders are not backing up the wrong tree, because what we are going through is unprecedented, and it has happened for a long time. You know, you have to look at the whole totality of things.
Yeah.
between June 25th, 2024 and June 25th, 2025, which was yesterday. You need to look at the whole picture and say, how has the country been for that whole period? Just so that we don't back up the wrong tree. Yeah. I've seen that today the responses and the explanations were about Rigathi Gachagua. Of course, he who alleges must prove. And one of the things that we are going as a country to wait for is who are the coup plotters and what is the evidence and when are they going to be taken to court. And I hope the Deputy President knows that there is no such thing as tutafanya nini, because we are a country that is governed by the Constitution. So even coup plotters will be charged with treason, which is a very clear process. And let's see if Rigathi Gachagua and others are going to be now connected by evidence to these events. It's just a little thing that we need to observe, that the Gen Z, who are suddenly becoming the forgotten part of this whole story, young people in this country who last year came up and asked very big questions about the direction the country is taking in leadership. Let's remember that when they hit the streets last year, Rigathi Gachagua and President Ruto as part of the same government. Even though the split became too apparent the next day, which is today, 26th. But at the time the Gen Zs went out to the streets, they were talking about one administration. And it'll be really a difficult thing to prove that something has changed with the way the Gen Zs are viewing things. Are they seeing Gachagua differently from they are seeing the rest of the administration that is left? Because, again, the timelines do not lie. The grievances of the younger generations predate the differences between the leaders of Kenya Kwanza, and that's President Ruto and Rigathi Gachagua. So in many ways, maybe, according to the youth, these people are all in the same pot. They are not in different pots, whether some are plotting a coup or not.
Yeah, and that's what we will take a break from and come back and talk about those issues that they were raising, what they wanted changed, the issues of good governance, the high cost of living, what had been happening leading up to June 25th, June 18th, June 25th last year, the sort of change they sought, the change that was promised, and where we are with that now. So we'll come back and talk about just what is at heart of the issues in this country when we return here on NewsGang.